This week's recap, everyone. We said last week that we were in collapse, but we really, as in the leadership team, as we thought through this area of sin and collapse and the fall, we really thought that it deserved a little bit more attention than just 1 week could give it. And so we decided to do Collapse Part 2 this week. And what we did this week is really tried to help the teens see how the fall, how the collapse plays out in their day-to-day lives. And one of the biggest ways that it does that is through our emotions, right? What if, and the question they asked, what if the problem isn't that we have emotions, but the problem is our emotions oftentimes have us, right? And so we kind of camped out in understanding our emotions and understanding that feelings and emotions are not bad things, but they're good gifts from God, and that they're broken by the fall, just like everything else is, right? And so we talked about Jeremiah 17:10, and that we as human beings really need to embrace and understand this, right? The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it, right? As human beings, we're advised to follow our hearts, just go after our hearts. And really, the problem, you can link all the different sins, all the different problems, racism, broken sexuality, wars, politics, all the ways that we handle those things are really fueled by how we feel in our emotions, right? And what we've been told is to follow our hearts, and that will teach us the right thing. But the reality is our hearts are sick. Our hearts are deceived. Our emotions are oftentimes wrong. And so we've got to learn and discern and figure out how to not be ruled by our emotions, but rather to redeem them as Jesus wants us to redeem them. And so feelings of anger and of unworthiness and of sadness and depression, they don't have to own us. And so one of the things that we did the night, presented some scenarios that are not unrealistic, but realistic to what could actually happen in lives, and presented one scenario of how the emotions ruled the people and how those emotions actually caused good. And so that's what we want to do, right? We want to see that our emotions really are broken by the fall, because the fall broke everything. The collapse broke everything. But how God wants to redeem our emotions and use our emotions for good and for His glory. And so we don't have to be ruled by our emotions. They don't have to own us. We can own them. Our feelings of worthiness are not attached to what we do or who we're connected with, but that we're created in the image of God and that He loves us. That's where our identity comes from and our sense of worthiness, right? In the garden, Adam and Eve didn't have any sense of shame, brokenness, guilt, unworthiness, anger, sadness, all that. Those things didn't exist. They're a result of the fall. But what we've got to learn to do this side of Genesis 3 is, how do we use our emotions for good? How do we allow our emotions to be submitted to the will of God? And so one of the things that the discipline or the application this week was to study Matthew chapter 22 verses 34 to 40, and the other places where we see the same text in Mark chapter 12 verses 31 and 32, and then in Luke chapter 10 verse 27. It's known as this first and second greatest commandments. And then Deuteronomy chapter 6 verses 4 to 7. And read those every single day this next week, and see if you don't notice a difference. And study them and bury them and memorize them, hide them in your hearts, and see if that doesn't make a difference in how you handle your emotions, at least just a little bit over the course of a week, right? So sin broke everything. The collapse broke everything. But that wasn't the end. There's hope coming, and we're going to get to that in this next part of our series. We pray that this blesses you, that you're able to process these things and live these things out together as a family.